Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Conjuring Last Rites, starring Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga, Mia Tomlinson, Ben Hardy, and Steve Coulter, directed by Michael Chavez. Now, before I get into this, yes, I am a month late. There's been a crisis that happened to me, and I'm not going to explain what it is, but that's why I was a little bit behind on this and some other reviews that are coming up. So I'm doing my best to catch up as best as I can. I'll say that much. Welcome back to G.B.M.H. and welcome back to The Conjuring. And it's been a while since I reviewed The Nun 2, and have reviewed the previous Conjuring films. And if you recall, the last one, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, was the worst one I've seen in the Conjuring universe. But let's see how this goes, because I have seen the movie twice, and it's hopefully an improvement. So let's get into it. We open in the year 1964, where a couple of young paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren, go through an investigation with Victoria Granger, having a haunting of some kind where her father hung himself thanks to the devil, and she believes there's something haunted in the room where she committed suicide, while Lorraine is pregnant with her daughter Judy. And she checks the room as she gets frightened, and at one point her water breaks, and they head to the hospital where Lorraine gives birth to Judy. And Lorraine says, "Don't let the devil hurt the baby." As she gives birth to it, at first she's dead, but miracle comes, and somehow baby Judy breathes, and I felt the pain she was going through as it was uncomfortable. And it's good to be uncomfortable in an R-rated horror film, in my opinion. But to be fair, when she was giving birth, while I was uncomfortable, like the devil was going to rip something off my privates, don't make me go there. That's how uncomfortable I was in the first 10 minutes, which did feel effective. We see Judy growing up with the paranormal in her life, and she has a song to get rid of it all. And the audience moves on to 22 years later in the year 1986 in West Piston, Pennsylvania, with a family named Smurl, like the main one, Dawn, her sister, Heather, and their little sister Shannon and Karen, with their parents Jack and Jeanette, along with their doggy Simon, and their grandparents. And who discovered the haunting after the mirror the grandparents got for them, as it looks fucking demonic. And something haunted happens while they celebrate Heather's baptism, until something breaks through the roof and escapes and scares the hell out of them. And we get the title of the movie showing up 18 minutes into the movie, while older Ed and Lorraine Warren, returned by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, give a lecture to a college. And we get a couple of questions regarding the Ghostbusters, as it was a popular movie by then, while their daughter Judy, played by Mia Tomlinson, witnesses it. And I like Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga's chemistry, but the other characters do act scared as it gets comedic. Ed and Lorraine have dinner with Judy, as Judy thinks of bringing her boyfriend Tony Spera, played by Ben Hardy, whom I reviewed a couple of times in X-Men Apocalypse and Bohemian Rhapsody, to Ed's birthday party, as his birthday is coming up. And Judy had a vision with Lorraine with something happening as we get back to Pennsylvania, and a baby doll named Susie scares the hell out of Janet while picking up some stuff for laundry purposes. And does it scare? And the scares are predictable to a point I was laughing at them. I don't expect that a Conjuring film, but more Annabelle, The Nun, The Curse of La Llorona, for example, to make me laugh, while Janet is on the phone with someone as Karen and Shannon run around, and she's led to believe they're fucking around in a pantry that they have, but something demonic is in there, and we don't see what it is. And Susie wanders off without one of the two little girls as it haunts her, and she ends up with something which felt so cheap as a scare. Dawn and Heather hang out in their bedroom together, and they think about throwing the mirror out of the house by the next day because it's garbage day. But to be fair, it scares them, but at the same time, the glass was broken as we move on to the next day, where they eat, and suddenly Dawn has a glass in her mouth and vomits it out, which is fucking disgusting, by the way. And that was another thing I felt uncomfortable during my second viewing of the movie, while Ed is in the doctor's office because he had another heart attack. And Ed's birthday party occurs in the next scene, as guests are here, including Drew Thomas, who was in the first three Conjuring movies, as he barely shows up in this movie. We also see Father Gordon, as was Brad Hamilton, who was in the both in the previous Conjuring movies. And I reviewed the actor who played Father Gordon before, and so much. Like, I've seen him in so much. Like, Judy is in her bedroom, while Judy's in her bedroom, and sees things like Annabelle, as well as using the tricks she gets to get rid of evil spirits earlier in the film. That, and this thing is bloated because this movie is too long at 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I felt every minute of it. And the writing in this is bad. Like, it's been about a decade since the original Conjuring movie. Tony comes to Judy and she tells him about the saying to get rid of the spirit until he kisses her as Lorraine enters, and Ed asks for him to get to the guys in the garage to play some ping pong while Judy doesn't tell Lorraine she's seeing things more often than she would, as Lorraine tells her to shut it out, and she doesn't want it in her life. And this piece of dialogue is laughable. And after Ed wins a game against Tony in ping pong, and he asks for her blessings of him proposing to Judy's hand in marriage, and it will take a while for Ed to accept that, but Lorraine accepts it after talking with Tony about how they've known each other for 6 months, and he says it's too early as Judy enters and sees the engagement ring and suddenly panics, and he suddenly panics and proposes to her in marriage, her hand in marriage. And after 6 months of dating, that feels too soon, and the cinematography was not great, but the acting in this was stiff. We go back to the Smurl household having an argument as Jack doesn't believe Dawn when she says they're living in a haunted house, and she runs out of the dinner table, and we get our second fuck in a Conjuring movie, whereas in the first time was in Annabelle Comes Home, when the babysitter's friend said it first. She says fuck it, and Annabelle comes home. And we move on to Jack getting possessed by this devil in the house, and we get a demon trying to kill Dawn after she watches the tape from earlier in the film when the demon blows out the candle before the roof collapses, and she sees one of the demons in there, and suddenly, like I said, she gets attacked by another demon, and it wakes up the whole household, and the demon disappears, and I knew it was coming as it wasn't very funny. That's how fucking predictable this scares were right off the bat, and they involved the news on the TV, even Larry King live. And this is pathetic. This is a pathetic way to end a series that was never scared me to begin with, except for maybe the briefs of the first one. Judy tried on a wedding dress with Lorraine and Brenda as she gets encountered by a spirit demon of herself, as it grabs her and puts her down until Lorraine and Brenda come in while Father Gordon sees grandmother Smurl died, and he visits Janet, and she says something pushed her down the stairs, and he says he can get the church involved, and he's here behind their back, and he sees something and leaves to tell the church as they'll listen to him, and he goes there and tries to get the head of the church's permission to perform an exorcism in the Smurl house, until he commits suicide by hanging himself in the church. And as far as the exorcism movies goes, it gets old real fast. And this is why they shouldn't make any more of these kind of movies as far as I'm concerned. Ed and Tony spend time together some time together and talking about mechanics, as Ed shows Tony the demonic possessions they have in their basement, until Ed hears Father Gordon's death, and he with Lorraine, Judy, and Tony going to the funeral, as Judy senses he knows something about the Smurls, and they're encountered by a priest named Father Ziegler about Father Gordon being killed in Pennsylvania, and they get back home with Lorraine draining the drain in the sink and sees the locket up with a photograph of Judy, and this water suddenly turns into blood for some reason, and I don't know why, as she believes something is wrong with Judy, and Tony comes to the house. And we move on to them going to the Smurls' house with Tony to get Judy out of there. But Jack knows who the Warrens are, as they need their help. And I don't buy this as a true story, as it's all a bunch of bullshit. Judy convinces Ed and Lorraine with Tony to help the Smurls out with their investigation, while Judy talks with Tony about how she can't tell her own mother anything behind her back. And they look around the house, and Ed makes some pancakes for them sometimes, waffles. and he asks Tony what happened to make him going between jobs, as he said it earlier in the film. And Tony admits he was a cop and gets a 12 gauge shotgun pointed at him, and his partner saying he's a dead man, which scared the shit out of him, as he wanted to quit because he almost didn't have a future. And next day buys the engagement ring for Judy with the family watching Sesame Street. And Judy takes photographs of them watching Sesame Street on the TV, as well as Lorraine, and they talk until they hear something, as that fell flat for me. I don't buy this explanation from Tony at all. Lorraine goes upstairs and finds a demon on the bed and goes back downstairs, while Judy hears Susie the doll coming towards her and gets asked by Karen if she likes dolls, and answers honestly and says not really, while Lorraine sees a world of darkness in the attic. And she explains to Ed there's 3 spirits in the attic, and Judy hears Lorraine in her case, but in the real case, a spirit calling her out in the attic. And she goes up there with the flashlight, and she finds the mirror from earlier in the film and believes it's possessed. Finds a chalk on the ground and finds a note saying "Miss Me," which felt like an Annabelle thing to do. And Judy gets the fuck out of the attic, and suddenly gets called by Karen and finds Annabelle standing up to attack Judy. And do I care at this point? No, I don't really. Judy tells Lorraine something is in the attic, and Ed finds the mirror with her and Lorraine almost touching it, and the news goes away for the night. And Ed says the last time they saw that mirror was when Judy was born in the beginning of the movie, and they found that after all these years, as Judy coughs up, and they get an idea of Ed and Tony going to take the mirror back home, and Ed feels something is different about the case, with Ed saying don't look at the mirror, saying a word from the Bible, while Judy is coughing like bananas, like she must be possessed, as Lorraine takes care of her while Tony starts the car, and Ed and Jack carry the mirror downstairs, and they move it quickly as they can when Jack gets out of the attic, and it crushes his leg, and it gets back up like a badass until Tony crashes his car into the fence, and suddenly starts to rain, which is an old trick of demonic movies, while everyone else takes Simon the doggy outside, and Lorraine sees Judy becoming something demonic as she pushes Lorraine into the basement, and Judy throws Simon into the wall. I'm like, oh no, don't kill the doggy. But luckily it stays alive, which thank God. Phew. And Ed sees Judy is demonic, and while Tony wants them to open the door. And this movie feels bloated, and like I said, I felt every minute of this thing. Tony eventually gets his way in the house, and Lorraine awakens as she hides from a demon until it finds her. And this demon that I swear to God looked like Marilyn Manson attacking Lorraine, and I'm thinking to myself, is that fucking Marilyn Manson? But I don't believe it is. Well, but I swear to God it looks like him. While Ed tells Jack to get everyone out of the house, and Lorraine realizes it was always Judy, and Ed tells her to get the book, and she almost hangs herself to death until Ed cuts the rope apart and saves Judy's life, but she doesn't have a pulse, and Ed tries to make her breathe with Tony, as Tony is more successful than Ed is because Ed has a heart attack of some kind. And Judy luckily awakens, and she looks into the mirror and spins around which looks so bad, while Ed tries to cast the spirit out of but almost crashes Jack as it's ripping his leg, and Ed puts the Bible on the mirror until Judy sings the saying she learned as a little girl that we saw earlier in the film to shut it out. And eventually it stops Judy and Lorraine praying for it to stop, that pushed the mirror away from Jack, as well as breaking the glass, and it stops like that, which doesn't make sense, as they leave the Smurl house and bring the mirror into the demonic basement of the Warren house, saying welcome to the family to Tony, in which I knew that was coming as it was that predictable, and gives him the keys to the demonic room. And we move on to the wedding between Judy and Tony, and we get some cameos from the other Conjuring films. And after the wedding, Lorraine tells Ed about the vision of the future, that as they become grandparents and writing their book that is terrible, and they teach to a new generation and never have stop having adventures and helping people, and we get the future comfort until she died many years later, and credits rolled to an after credits scene of what ended up happening to the mirror to this day. And I didn't like the climax, but it definitely felt better than part 3. But by how much? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 4.4 out of 10. Definitely better than the last Conjuring film, but not quite as good as the first two movies, and I like Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga's chemistry throughout the series. And there was a couple of uncomfortable moments of the film in which I felt was a good thing for an R-rated horror film, but as far as the rest of the movie goes, I felt the scares were predictable to a point. I laughed at when they were coming, as it felt cheap. It felt bloated, as this movie is too long at 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I felt every minute of it, while the characters act scared, but to me, it cuts off as comedic at times, and I don't expect that in a Conjuring more than I expect that in Annabelle, The Nun, or The Curse of La Llorona, which were laughable films, much worse than this film. And it's been a decade since the original Conjuring film, and they made this the final film, as I wish the third film was the last film, being worse than the Conjuring franchise, whereas it was not. The cinematography was fine, but not great in my opinion, but the acting in this was stiff, as the writing in this is not great either, so it's a mild non-recommendation for the movie because the scares were too fucking obvious, and when they do happen, I bust up laughing my ass off, as it was a pathetic way to end a series that never scared me except for the first Conjuring movie. And this is not the worst in the series, but it is one of the better bad movies in the series. And like I said, in the previous movies, this doesn't scare me, but more make me laugh. And as far as I'm concerned, don't make any more Exorcist movies or anything like that. Or movies about exorcisms in general. It gets real old real fast. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for returning to this Conjuring world. And until, I don't know if they'll ever do another one, but until then,